Mr. Chris Cline, how you doing today, sir?
I am fantastic, Mr. Joey G. Angola, the venerable Joey G.
Chris, if you could do one thing besides work in the insurance industry, I guess maybe professionally, would it be playing guitar or BMX biking? I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question.
Curveball question. What if it was neither? But
Oh, all right.
if it was an A/B question, I have, despite my passion for bicycles and BMX, it has actually been like a stated, like, rub the magic lamp and the genie comes out and get one wish. I'd love to be able to have made a living as a musician, playing guitar specifically.
Really, I would have
Yeah.
thought the biking would have taken it. I feel like you might be more accomplished in that arena. That's just me, like casually observing your social media activity, but who knows?
Not to position it as that I was this fantastic BMX racer or anything. I think it's more of I'm more accomplished there by virtue of how bad of a guitar player I am.
Fair
So,
enough.
yeah,
Fair enough.
right.
All right. Well, then I got to know what's the third option? What's the right option that I wasn't giving you?
Yeah, it would be some sort of a weird thing. So I guess you wouldn't expect this, but I'm a science geek, and I've really become, over the last maybe decade, a lot of the stuff I've consumed is certainly like full blown astrophysics. I find that stuff to be phenomenal, but like I'd love to be a neuroscientist. I'm fascinated by the brain and the way the brain works, and even as something as simple as like the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, or some stuff that's it's really really deep. But it's just fascinating to me. So I'm probably already out of horsepower to talk about it right now, but I think it would be really neat to be on the leading edge of neuroscience and our abilities cognitively as humans. And you hear a lot about bias now in the media with many of the topics that are front and center, but that kind of stuff is fascinating to me, and the way we're hardwired versus the way we've adapted.
I definitely agree. If I could do anything, I'd be more on the space side of things. The things much like your guitar playing ability, I'm not nearly as smart enough in math as I need to be to even like hang in that realm. But if I was, I would certainly like to have dabbled in some sort of academic, I guess, maybe arena. That would be interesting for sure.
I'll tell you, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson podcast is easily one of my top three listened to content that I listen. And it's anything that he talks about with any guest, AI in sports to anything as it relates to the universe and the cosmos is fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating to me.
Yes, yes, indeed it is, and it makes you feel. I think you can get too caught up into it sometimes, to where you start to think everything going on down here. Like, what's the point of it all? There's just all of this stuff out there that we have no idea exists. It becomes very humbling, I guess, in some aspects. But
I know we didn't
moving
get on
back,
here to talk about science, but I do want literally just the other night in my Facebook memories, I must have posted this from around the campfire somewhere over the last couple of years, and staring at the stars. But my Facebook post was something like, if you wondered how small really are, contemplate this. The closest star to the Earth is 78 million or 78 light years away. So that's how old that light is, and that's the closest, or some crazy thing like that. And so it's
yeah,
just fascinating to think about. So at
it
light
is.
speed, it would take 78 years to get there.
So let's bring that home a little bit. What are we looking at in terms of our industry that feels like it might be too far away? What is kind of out there that we maybe feel is it's kind of too big, it's expansive? Is there something that we're kind of looking at that is old, that we're just not paying enough attention to, that we have the right perspective of?
Some really great, fascinating conversations we could have there. And I love that dynamic. How do you take these seemingly disparate questions and bring them together? I've spoken about this in a couple of spots, and it might be a little narrow over time, but one of the things that comes to mind, the first thing that came to mind when you said that, and there are probably many, is how does the proliferation of the utilization of data in our industry and AI and modeling and all these types of things that bring a great deal of value to everything, right? Even in the consumer experience and the decisioning on the carrier side, from pricing and underwriting, and the ability of an agency to play their role in all of this. Well, on the other side of this thing is this also growing concern around consumer privacy and how that's coming to life in very different ways in different parts of the globe and even in the country. I don't know what that looks like. So there is a scientific, what was the question? What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? I feel like these things are on some sort of a collision course, and I don't know that they necessarily collide, but they're concepts that seem somewhat contradictory that are gaining significant momentum in their own place. And as this becomes a much more global, we're past that. Everything is global now, but we're 50 state regulated, and we're talking to people, I presume, that are mostly inside the United States. But privacy and compliance laws are starting to look different by state. New York and California are obviously maybe the ones that would raise the most attention. But even here in our home state of Ohio, there are obligations on firms, financial services firms. Now, I think you have to be over 5 million in revenue or over so many employees, or you get some exemptions. But typical independent agency, probably not incredibly equipped to comply and notice and be able to do those types of things. So I don't know how this looks, but that's one that comes to my mind. And it kind of has a scientific-y, spacey type thing when you think about worlds colliding.
It's definitely a good point, because it's something that we've seen on the horizon for quite a while, right? We've seen it coming. Yeah. I think what you said perfectly is that the thing that I'm, I guess, maybe concerned about is us maybe missing the potential of that, as we sort of get up to full speed capability in that department. Again, privacy coming down on the other side of the track. Do we get ahead of it before they collide, right? Or what does it look like? It's not really like a game, but I don't know if there's necessarily a question in there. But I think what you said is right, is that there's a lot more responsibility that's going to go into this, and how we navigate through that, and what the consumer expectations are, and just not being to a point where we're playing catch up on this. So it's fascinating, definitely.
I think you're right. And these things do tend to work themselves out over time. This is a very, very large industry that provides a great deal of good to the communities that we're all in, for the people that we serve and protect and insure. So, this will sort itself out. And we're not the only industry that has to deal with this. This is so cliche, Joey, right? But everybody's doing business online, and especially now, over the last 5 months, so many of our transactions are happening virtually, and we're exposing so much of our digital footprint to folks. So every industry is having to deal with, how do you make sure you're really anonymizing PII and those types of things, and complying with privacy expectations of customers. And I just think that the nuance of our industry is the state specific regulation and the nuance that could live there. And as more and more independent agencies start to cross state lines and serve larger constituencies outside their individual state, it's something to pay attention to. It becomes somewhat political, I guess. Are you you can have all my data if it benefits me in some ways, person, or do you want all of your stuff kind of kept under lock and key, in the whole make me disappear world of the GDPR, I guess, in Europe. But I think just being proactive about it, trying to understand it, be a good partner, and be a good steward of people's information, and use it for good, which is a fascinating topic in of itself. Hard to crawl out of bed in the morning unless you assume noble intent, those types of things. But yeah, that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah, so bringing it back down to the ground even further on all of this, what are you kind of seeing from that frontline approach with agents? What are they dealing with right now, in the very immediate kind of present, in terms of the challenges they're facing? What are the things that they're working through right now? What are some of the more interesting things you're seeing?
It's interesting. I don't know that a lot of that stuff has changed fundamentally. Obviously, it'd be really easy to say that agencies have responded differently to the global scenario here, and pivoted more quickly and more successfully. But 5 months into the current state of affairs, it's no longer about how you work in a more remote environment. How do you take care of customers in this situation? You either did or you didn't. And it seems like by now, nearly we didn't lose any agencies. No agencies that we work with magically ceased to exist. Everybody's figured it out. Some were far more equipped, and I guess I would say that Magic Monday when this sort of hit, at least in our geography. Some were running just as fast, and some it took several weeks. So I kind of set that aside, right? I mean, that's just a kind of an operational thing. But when you step back and look at it, there's still all of these same conversations around how do you create organic growth in all of this. And that probably is the one thing that is very real right now, depending on the mix of business and the target classes that certain agencies focused on. There are very real and very different impacts on their financial return. So if you see agencies out there that focused on the hospitality industry and did very, very well for a while, and they're having different conversations with their carriers and maybe even their employees today than they would. But we also talk to agencies that are having record-breaking months, not just like in the year, but period. Great success using traditional marketing. We've talked to some folks that are actually now back to TV and traditional radio and direct mail and having phenomenal success in attracting personal lines and still helping small businesses. But organic growth is a very real conversation with carriers, again, based on their nuance and the way most carriers treat their contingent models, have some sort of a net policy gain, net customer gain growth component to them. And so that's very real and front and center. And again, sometimes it's sort of just a non-issue, and in others it's a very heartfelt and passionate conversation around very real financial circumstances that agencies are in. But beyond that, agencies are investing still very heavily and thinking differently around this digital component. And those that were dabbling in it are being forced to move a couple steps up the ladder fast and playing catch up. And so what tools are out there? How are we helping arm them? And how are we thinking about exposing them to, I guess, the mechanisms and maybe some other vendors and those types of things that are good at this type of stuff? I could stop now and see if you have any follow-up there. Rambling.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I think one of the things that I found, I was struck as you were kind of going through that was, I remember a conversation we had a couple years ago, and you were saying, yeah, I basically work out of a backpack now.
Yeah,
and Westfield was pretty, I mean, maybe progressive in adopting sort of this free form kind of work environment, and I'm assuming that's only kind of served you better during everything. How does Westfield view itself now, kind of after all of this, in terms of what how an insurance company should look, feel, and operate? I mean, because it only maybe solidified sort of the path you guys were on. Were there any sort of big epiphany moments or conversations about, hey, I think I'm glad we made the jump to where we were now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if I was to speak on behalf of the organization, I know deep down there's a decent amount of deep thanks that we'd started to make this transition to equipping people with the tools to work when and where they're the most comfortable a while ago. So part of that was creating a campus, and you've been there and seen the transition we've made, full overhaul and renovation, and very open, very collaborative, a lot of that modern work environment that was gaining some momentum, but along the way it was giving people the tools to work anywhere. We wanted that campus to be where they wanted to work, but they could work anywhere. And so quite candidly, when we all went home in March and started to work on Monday, I'm sure there were some blips along the way, but holistically there were really none. Nearly everybody who was asked to continue their job duties from their home using their laptop or VPN dial-in did. And we had the infrastructure to support that, and people were using WebEx, and that's the platform we use, or Zoom and Jabber and those types of things, and we were pretty successful. So from that perspective, I think very, very fascinating, and we will continue down that path. And we've been in many of agencies that we work with may started to have experienced this. Now it's how do you go from business continuity mode to this is the way we're doing business? And now realizing that you can actually have a visit with an agency, a business discussion with an agency using video. And if everybody now that is kind of in the same spot of using those tools, the business conversations are just as hearty as they were before. And they're just as healthy because now there's not this well, we don't want to do it unless we can do it in person, because now everybody's forced to do everything via video or via phone. So the novelty or the angst around all of that is long since passed. So we've been very, very fruitful conversations, and more examples of us engaging larger partners with more people in the agency with less disruption to the agency. So what might have been a field call from a commercial lines person with a couple of folks in the agency, now we can invite 30. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're up against. Here's the appetite. Here's our hit ratios. What are you guys seeing? And so in some ways it's improved our ability to engage our agencies. And then of course in certain geographies, we're starting to get back into some face-to-face, but local guidelines, are dictating those, as is individual comfort with with the situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you've talked to some agencies who are having record months just of their entire careers, and I've heard that too from a number of different people. Is there anything that sticks out as to why that may be the case? Is it just that a lot of the noise has been stripped away? There's been sort of just focus. There's been a forced efficiency to the whole thing, assuming they're dealing in a business that wasn't obviously dramatically impacted.
I don't know that there's really a magic formula there, but those that were already well down this path of being able to interact with, starting off with engage the sales process through more of a digital approach. They were already investing in SEO. They were already investing in the top of their funnel via, and they overuse the word digital, but they were investing in that and able to interact. They're able to service all their clients. So it wasn't odd in their market for their agency to show up that way. And that's got to be some level of authenticity around it being in your model. And so it really wasn't any disruption for them. And I've talked to some agencies who are really good at their own analytics. Part of this is when you really start to look at it, there's some significant efficiency gains that people are starting to see. I've seen it even on the team that I lead and work with here at Westfield. There's a lot of distraction. Just talked about how great the workplace is, but there's still built-in distractions. There's coffee shops and bumping into people and going to longer lunches and things that are inherently healthy. But for at least this period of time right now, you start to see very real and measurable efficiency gains when people are just doing their work. How long and how sustainable that is, I mean, we all read the stuff that's floating around on social media around, is this sustainable? What's the future of the office? What's the future of all this? How do you keep people engaged and motivated and those types of things? But those that are winning, they just kept on going and they poured fuel in the fire. So I guess there's an interesting one. I was involved in a couple of web panels and different conversations really early on was, is it okay to sell in the middle of a pandemic and an economic downturn? And some folks that we mutually know even, kind of debated like, okay, hey, let's just be here for our clients. And others were like, I'm going to go sell. I mean, being here for your clients also means offering them solutions to make sure their coverage is, sound. They've got the right stuff going on based on life, changes. And maybe they do need to want to figure out a way to trim a few bucks off of their monthly expenses. And so there was some ethical dialogue around that at the time, but now I think everybody agrees, like, hey, it's okay to be out hitting the streets virtually and sell and write business and grow and try to get there.
Yeah, and I think it was, like you said, it was that sort of just adjustment period of dealing with, there's a difference between selling and sort of exploiting, right? And
yeah, totally.
Any sort of exploitation, just any sort of kind of talking about what it is that you did felt like you were taking advantage of some sort of vulnerable situation. But I think we've all, like you said, worked right through it. But speaking of selling, right? Part of your fancy title at Westfield deals with the word distribution, right? So what do you think, it's a long contested sort of, kind of conversation about what does the future of distribution look like? Where do you see it going? Who do you see kind of gaining an advantage? Or do we, kind of just continue down the same path, just only better?
There's definitely going to be winners and losers in all of this. And I think that, what we don't know is how long the current state of affairs persists and what that does to any of this. But in terms of the big buyers being the big buyers, right? And so if organic growth isn't there, what kind of returns are they able to generate from their model, with the private equity backed firms. But I think in many ways that machine is going to continue to go. And those that are able to stay really disciplined and focused and investing in customer experience for the future, being when, where, and how the customers want to interact, are going to have a great deal of success. And there's a pretty broad number, a number of swim lanes of types of agencies there. So, even more traditional privately held county seat type agencies, there are some of them that are having phenomenal success. And as long as I've been in the industry, there's been this notion that segment of the independent agency channel goes away. And I've just come to the realization and the belief that some will always go away. But those that are willing to reinvent, stay relevant, and invest in all the right tools are going to have a great deal of success. But what you start to see is it's a little bit of a script flipped on how they're approaching. So this traditional expense model built around service, heavy commissions on producers, those models that are starting to see, and you see them on TV, and they're highly digitized, much more global. They're investing in far more on the front side of things, and the role of the producer changes. It'll be interesting to see how successful they are and whether they're able to get to the point where they're generating real returns. But I do think that, that model has traction, and there are some of those firms out there now that are going to make it, and they're going to be really successful, and they're going to move the needle. And some traditional agencies don't like that carriers like us would be entertaining those. It feels like competition, but they're just independent agencies with their DNA that have completely restructured the way they think about those types of things. And so you could go to our website and see these types of folks, but you're talking about a Goosehead, for example, that's completely rethought the franchise model, and they're crushing it. But they invested in technology, and they invested in a turnkey model, and they're giving people that want options chances. This notion of networks and aggregators, it does feel like there's continual growth in that space, and the quality networks are really investing in a menu of items that are appealing to a certain class or a certain group of agencies, and they're attracting and they're growing and they're adding members. And if the tide continues to raise most ships, they're going to be successful.
All right, Chris, I got two more questions for you. I'm curious to know if you had to just have one thing that you could tell an agent of everything that you've learned throughout your career in the industry, everything that you've seen, as to maybe what sits at the core of what you think is, important, effective sort of agency distribution, whatever, right? What is that one thing that you've kind of seen time and time again that has been tested, that always comes out on top? Maybe a little bit of an impossible question, Chris, but we're going to go with it.
Right.
Is there a thing that if you just gave somebody one little golden ticket of sorts, what is that thing?
I guess I'll answer that through the lens of not thinking about the really, really, really large firms, because they've got this somewhat solved for based on how large they are. And there's so many different answers that wouldn't be wrong, right? But it feels like if the mid-size and smaller agency gets really intentional around processes and culture of always be hiring, a lot of the things that we talk about becoming woes could be solved for. And I would asterisk that by always be hiring diverse thought and be thinking different. Don't hire yourself. And that's maybe an easy way of saying, hey, the perpetuation thing is a problem. But if you're bringing new blood in, you're bringing new talent in, you're always you have a fresher look on the customer, a fresher look on the market. And if you're thinking about diversity, that through the diversity lens, you're really expanding what your agency can do. And by default, you're being forced to re-engineer your culture, re-engineer your tools, and re-engineer your approach of engaging customers, because you have to be doing it to be attracting talent.
All right, Chris, last question. I might have asked this to you before. I'm not sure. Right. If I did, I certainly don't remember the answer, but I'm curious to see if it's changed in any way, shape, or form. If I had the ability to grant you a magical insurance power to kind of magically reshape, reform, restructure any part of the industry that you feel is the most deserving, what is that reshaping, restructuring, and where is it going?
Did not ask me that question before. I don't know, maybe it's utopian, but if you kind of view that right now, we seem to have an opportunity to be thinking about, we started to go down this path, but there are so many disparate technologies and platforms emerging, all trying to solve slightly different and then overlapping problem statements or friction points in the overall value chain. And we all can see what it looks like to get over the wall, and carriers and agencies and customers are transacting business on this unified platform where data flows freely. AI is out there, behaviors are being predicted, products are being offered, risk is being mitigated. And what does that look like through the lens of, we're still several thousand insurance companies dealing business with tens of thousands of independent agencies across millions of clients. It'll probably never get perfect, but it would be really magical if, when we get over some sort of a hump and the players that are going to win, and we really know what that looks like, so that we're dealing less with that and more about how do we go out and serve the customers. So everybody's building this from the customer back, but slightly different approaches. So I don't know if that's super specific, but getting past all the noise of the tools that are out there, waiting for some to win, and let's really start taking care of the customer and growing.